Hey guys, it's Senti Reads, and as you can see by the video title, today I'm back with another editing lesson. I was originally going to do a full rant review on this book, but honestly the plot was such a mess that I don't think I can even coherently critique it. Also, this isn't a heavy hitter like Fourth Wing or ACOTAR or anything like that, so I really didn't want to flame this author for no reason. So I'm going to follow what I did with my previous editing video, and I won't be mentioning the book or the author by name, because I'm not out here to ruin anyone's dreams, I'm just here to be kind of a bitch. But in a constructive way, because I think there's plenty to learn by fixing some of the bad writing in this book. And boy, was there a lot of bad writing in this book. Grammar mistakes aside, I think this book had more blatant typos than anything I have ever read. Like the kind of typo that any basic word processor will flag, so I don't really know how they were missed other than just laziness, which, you gotta check your shit before you upload it. I used to have a really strict stance on believing you need to hire an external editor to check your work before self-publishing, and to an extent I still feel this way, but I think I've loosened up a little bit because of how expensive editors can be. It can be $1,000 or more depending on the length of your book and the type of edits you need, and I don't think self-publishing should just be for wealthy people, so I have kind of eased up on this a little bit. If you have not been able to read between the lines, this was a self-published book on Kindle Unlimited where trash seems to fester for whatever reason. But anyway, if you can't afford an editor, I think you need to put extra work into polishing your book yourself. If there are so many grammar mistakes that it starts to distract your reader, then you need to go back and brush up on some basic skills. And if there are a lot of typos, it comes off as lazy, and it will definitely put readers off from picking up any more of your other books, so you really need to be careful about these things. Like one typo, whatever, but this was riddled with typos. I think you guys get the point by now. But before I get into editing, I have just one other disclaimer. I know some of what I'm going to say in this video is going to come off as exceptionally nitpicky, but that's kind of what editing is, and there are little mistakes that really add up and ruin the reading experience, so yes, this is going to get into the weeds. Also, some of my advice comes from personal preference and my personal taste, so feel free to leave your own rewrites in the comments below so we can get some differing styles. With that out of the way, let's jump into some editing.
Let's get ready to rumble!
When I heard the telltale sound of the door of the room next to me opening, I ran to open my own door. As I threw it open, I caught her just as she turned to close the door. Okay, everyone, take a shot every time they say open or door. Word repetition like this is a big no-no. It comes off very amateur and it makes it very difficult to read. I was stumbling over my words trying to get through those sentences right there. It's just not good. This passage also is an example of using filter words like heard or saw or felt or any other kind of sensory word like that. This book is a first-person POV, so we don't need to be told that the character heard the door open. They had to have been able to hear it in order to describe it, so the filter word heard is unnecessary. Hopefully that makes sense. It's also confusing that the character refers to the door of the room next to me as if she doesn't know what that room is, so it's adding ambiguity in a place where it really does not need to be ambiguous, and it's adding to the clunkiness of this two sentences right here. I would rewrite this as, the heir's door creaked open, and I hurried into the hallway to meet her. Straight to the point, just get it done. Anytime you can cut down on the number of words and simplify a sentence, I encourage you to do it. Removing filter words like heard, seen, felt, all those kinds of words is a good place to start, and this book has a repeated problem with filter words, so we're gonna talk about it again later. Or right now, actually. Let's talk about it right now. Damon nodded. Then when we both heard light footsteps, our eyes sought out the sound. At the end of the hallway, I spotted a human girl with long brown hair cascading down her back and eyes void of any emotion. She was wearing a long white gown that was stained with blood in some areas. First off, the first sentence is very odd. I think the word when needs to be removed, so it's Damon nodded and then we both blah blah blah. Or maybe the sentence is supposed to be combined with the second sentence, so Damon nodded, then we whatever, and then our eyes sought out whatever. It's a bad sentence. Something needs to be changed with that. In general, you don't need to use the word then to indicate what's happening next in a sequence of events. It's another unnecessary kind of filter word or filler word that doesn't need to exist and just interrupts the flow. We don't need to be told, and then this, and then that, and then this, because that's how a sequence works. We know these things are happening in order, so we don't need, and then this, and then that. So hopefully that makes sense. In first-person point of view, you have to be careful about how you describe what characters other than the main character are feeling or experiencing, because it's not their point of view. Unless the point of view character is psychic, they can't really outright say what other characters feel or think, because how would they know? How does this character know that Damon also heard the footsteps? Did he have some kind of physical reaction that indicated he heard it? how do we know? If the sound was loud enough that the POV character heard it, then we don't really need to be told that Damon also heard it, because we can just assume that if she heard it, then he must have heard it. So you just don't need to clarify this kind of thing. It's understood. The second sentence in this passage is also strange. Our eyes sought out the sound makes it seem like the eyes like popped out of the characters' heads and now they're rolling around the floor investigating for the source of the sound. It's odd. Also, if the POV character is looking around trying to find the source of the sound, then how does she know what Damon's eyes are doing? Because she can't look around for the sound and also look at Damon's eyes. So, it's just weird. This is weird. The rest of the passage with the girl or whatever, it's not that bad. It's just really clunky and has a lot of extra words. I'd rewrite this as, Damon nodded. The echo of incoming footsteps drew my attention to the end of the hallway as a girl with long dark hair approached. Her dingy white dress was soiled with splotches of dried blood, and her eyes were emotionless. I had kind of a difficult time trying to fix this passage, so I'm interested to see in the comments below what you guys can come up with. Also, a quick content warning for the next passage. It involves gun violence, and it's in an oddly non-graphic way, but you can skip to this timestamp on the screen right now if you just really don't want to hear about anything like that. So, 3, 2, 1, skip or don't. Just before she reached his arms, her head jerked to the side as a bullet flew through the window and buried itself in her head. My blood ran cold. Yet again, we have a problem with word repetition, in this case head, mentioned multiple times, and it makes what is supposed to be a very shocking, intense moment come off as very clunky and kind of confusing. We have another case of the POV character explaining something that she should not know. In this case, if you're not aware, bullets travel faster than the human eye can see. And so the way this is phrased makes it seem like the POV character has Matrix vision and she's seeing slow motion bullet trails flying around and she can track them. And it's just like, it's too much, girl. You did not see a bullet fly through, you're not seeing a bullet fly through the air. Nobody sees that. This is a dumb way to describe this. Additionally, there is the cliche of blood running cold, which wouldn't be that much of a problem if the author didn't use that phrase at least 5 other times throughout this novel, if not more. If you're gonna use a cliche like that, you get one pass at your blood ran cold, that's it. You get to use it once, everything else you need to come up with some other description. I'd rewrite this as, with a loud crash, the window splintered into a web of cracks. She collapsed before she could reach him, blood pooling around her head. Holy fuck, someone was shooting at us. This is another passage I had trouble with, so I'd love to see what you guys come up with. The reason why I had so much issues with trying to rewrite this is that later in the scene, the bullets were described as punching through the window without shattering it, which for some reason felt very weird to me and I thought was not what would actually happen. But actually, a bullet can pierce a pane of glass without entirely shattering the glass out of the frame. So that's why I had trouble trying to incorporate that detail to give a little bit more detail into this passage. Anyway, that's enough of my rambling. Please give this an attempt in the comments below. I would love to see if you can come up with something better. Tobias accepted it with just the tips of his fingers and carefully turned the pages, as if it was covered in germs. An oxymoron if I ever saw one, seeing as he lived in utter filth. Grammar girlies, help me out with this one. Is this actually an oxymoron? Because I feel like it's not. My understanding is that an oxymoron is a figure of speech that uses contradictory words together, so examples include deafening silence, controlled chaos, alone together, jumbo shrimp, things like that. So in this case, this is a filthy neat freak, but they didn't use that figure of speech. I think this is actually situational irony, because you would not expect a clean freak to live in filth. But it's not an oxymoron because it's missing the figure of speech. As I just said, they didn't say filthy neat freak, which I think is an oxymoron. I don't know. Please let me know. This one was definitely super nitpicky, and I might not even be right in this situation. But don't throw terms around in your writing if you are not absolutely sure you're using them correctly, because then you're going to have your reader in this weird situation like me, trying to figure out if this is actually an oxymoron instead of actually focusing on what you wrote and what this is doing for the plot. So just don't use words if you don't know if you're using them correctly. No one spoke until we passed the guards and loaded into the car, the seriousness of the situation weighing on our shoulders. I think this was meant to be one sentence, so that period should be a comma, and then it is technically correct. But as 2 separate sentences, the verb tense is not correct, so weighing should be weighed if this is going to be 2 separate sentences and not connected by a comma. Also, experiencing stress as something weighing on your shoulders is another cliche, so I would just remove that second sentence entirely and just leave the first one. There was a sound of disdain from the leader. Sounds like you liked it, he commented. I believe the word they're actually looking for here is disdain, not disdain. And I know they sound the same out loud, but if you see them on the screen right now, they are not the same word. So if you're using a homophone, homonym, whatever that word is, make sure you are using the correct one. I swung the door open, not caring that in my haste I tore it off its hinges. Growling aloud, I stepped out of the room and glared at the hunters who were waiting for me outside the room. I know I'm getting repetitive with my critique of the repetitive words, but oh my god, it happens all throughout this book and it is so fucking annoying! We don't need to be told that the hunters are waiting outside of the room if the character just left the room. Otherwise, they wouldn't have needed to leave the room to interact with the hunters. Like, it's so unnecessary. It's just so unnecessary. It's also weird that the character aggressively tears the door off its hinges in their haste and then is described as stepping out of the room, which feels like a slow action if you're just taking a step that seems cautious and slow. Not like you're ripping the door off the hinges, running out. Like, that just kind of misses the tone for me. Also, the phrase growling aloud is unnecessary because growling is a sound, so of course it's happening aloud. You can't, growl and not make a noise out loud. That's not growling, so saying that's just pointless. It's also unnecessary. I am losing my mind. I'd rewrite this as, I tore the door off its hinges as I stormed out of the room. Growling, I glared at the hunters waiting in the hallway. I still think the part about the hunters being in the hallway might be a little unnecessary, but I wanted to make it clear that this character is not looking back into the room of the door they just ripped off the hinges and glaring at the people in that room, so I did my best. I let out a small huff, causing his eyes to flash toward me, his brows pushed together and his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't like my response. There's a lot of things wrong here, so let's start at the beginning. Let out a small huff is a really long and unnecessary way of saying I huffed. I must not have screenshotted another example, but the author does this frequently with other actions as well. So instead of saying things like she glared, the author writes she sent a glare. And the extra words really just get in the way and bog down the writing because they're unnecessary. You don't need them. You don't need to let out a huff. You can just huff. Also, as I mentioned before, you don't need to use words like then when writing a sequence of events. The same goes for the word cause or causing. Unless multiple things are going on at the same time, you don't need to explicitly say that one action caused the other to happen, because that's just what we're naturally going to assume. I somehow haven't mentioned it so far in this video, but this is also an example of show don't tell, which this author struggles with a lot. It's clear by this character's reaction that he didn't like the response, so we don't need to be directly told that. On top of being unnecessary, it makes it feel like the author doesn't trust the reader to understand what's happening, so you really need to give your audience some credit and don't spoon-feed everything to them. If you don't think your writing is clear enough, then put effort into making it clearer instead of just outright saying what is happening. I'd rewrite this as, I huffed, and his eyes darted to me. Brows furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. I feel like I'm pointing out the same mistakes a lot, so let's wrap this video up with a final example. Remove your weapons, the captain commanded. I pulled my dagger out of its holster, but instead of throwing it aside, I flipped it in the air and caught it so the blade was facing behind me. I'm not going to bother rewriting this one because I genuinely don't understand what the fuck is even happening. The only way I can picture this is that she's throwing the blade over her shoulder somehow and catching it behind her back, but I don't understand why she's doing that because the captain would clearly be able to see that she's doing that. I don't think you can throw it over your back and catch it that quick without somebody noticing. And the whole point was for her to get rid of her weapons, so I'm really not sure what is being done here. When describing actions, it's important to make it clear what is actually happening, which in this case, clearly I don't understand. If I'm just being obtuse or stupid or whatever, and this is so obvious of what is happening, please let me know. But I really don't understand what this motion she is doing, flipping it in the air. I don't know what is happening. If I'm having issues like this with my own writing, sometimes I'll physically stand up and act out whatever I'm trying to describe, so I can tell if the motions actually make sense. How would I have to move my arm to do a certain thing? Or if I did this and some other person countered, is that even physically possible? Thank you to my boyfriend for acting as my prop sometimes. Appreciate it, bro. Anyway, if you can't actually tell what is happening, that is a big problem. And I'm not going to start throwing knives around to try to fix this passage. So I'm just going to leave it at that. If you understand what she is doing with these knives, please let me know. I think that's enough complaining for one video. Hopefully you were able to get something useful out of my ranting, and if you already knew all of these tips, hopefully you got a laugh out of the bad writing. As I've said throughout the video, I'd love to see your interpretations of the rewrites in the comments below, and I'm sure a lot of you guys could come up with way better stuff than I did, but that's all the time I have for today. I will see you in the next video. Bye guys!